Chapter 1. The Proposal No One Expected. The spring air at Harrowdale Estate smelled of lilacs, dew and scandal. Lady Tilda Harrowdale, eldest daughter of Viscount Harrowdale, stood under a carved stone arch, her arms crossed like a commander inspecting an ill-equipped battalion. She watched with cool detachment as her younger sister, Madeline, twirled across the lawn in the arms of his fiancé Marquis Lewis of Dunmere. "She spins like a fool," Tilda muttered, sipping wine. "She'll twist her ankle before the musicians finish the next reel." "You say that every spring fete," replied Aunt Agatha from behind her fan, "and yet Madeline has never once tripped. But you, dear niece, have scared off 3 suitors and 1 overeager vicar." Tilda raised an eyebrow. "The vicar shouldn't have asked if I'd like to pray for a docile spirit. I was perfectly docile until he opened his mouth." Before Agatha could respond, a commotion rippled at the edge of the garden. Tilda's wine paused halfway to her lips. A tall man in plain military attire stood stiffly beside the topiary swans. Dust clung to his boots and his brown hair looked wind-whipped and tragically helmet-flattened. He held a bouquet of wildflowers that drooped under the sun. Several guests turned to gawk at him as he cleared his throat. Lady Tilda blinked. It was Lord Evan of Lysmere, the Duke's 3rd son. Quiet, border stationed. Hardly ever seen in society unless a war broke out or a horse needed rescuing from a moat. And he was walking toward her. "Oh no," she whispered. He stopped just a few paces away, red in the ears but holding her gaze with surprising steadiness. Then, in front of 30 nobles, a suspiciously watching butler, and at least 2 confused geese, he blurted, "Lady Tilda Harrowdale, I wish to ask for your hand in marriage." Aunt Agatha choked on her lemon tart. Silence fell. Tilda stared at him for a long, incredulous moment. Then she turned slightly, scanning the crowd as if checking for jesters. "Is this a dare?" she asked slowly. Evan swallowed. "No, my lady." "Some elaborate joke from your brothers, perhaps?" "No, my lady." She glanced at the wildflowers, now drooping with what looked like second-hand embarrassment. "You're serious?" "Yes." A long pause. Then Tilda let out a sharp laugh, not cruel but certainly amused. She stepped forward, voice low and measured. "You rode here from the borderlands in the middle of peace season, covered in dust and carrying weeds to ask me, Lady Tilda Harrowdale, for my hand?" He nodded once, solemn. Tilda shook her head, the beginnings of a smile at her lips. "I'm flattered, Lord Evan. I truly am. But I must decline." "I expected you might," he said softly. She tilted her head. "Then why ask?" "Because," he replied, eyes steady, "you're the most fascinating woman I've ever seen. And you deserve someone who doesn't flinch when you speak your mind." That shut her up. Aunt Agatha let out a faint, "Oh my," and several elderly ladies began whispering furiously behind their fans. But Tilda didn't blush. She was far too seasoned for that. Instead, she leaned in close and murmured, "I admire your boldness, Lord Evan. But affection is not earned through admiration alone." He nodded again. "Then I'll earn the rest." Before she could retort, he bowed, nearly losing his grip on the flowers, turned smartly on his heel and strode away with military dignity. He only tripped once. That night, Tilda stormed into Madeline's chambers and flung herself dramatically into a tufted armchair. "I cannot believe he proposed to me." "Me?" Madeline, sitting at her vanity brushing her curls, smiled serenely. "You are quite pretty, Tilda." Tilda waved a hand. "Don't be absurd. He barely knows me. I doubt we've shared more than 10 words in our lives." "He probably listens when you're lecturing father's retainers," Madeline said, dreamy. "Maybe he likes your voice. Or your cleverness. Or the way you stab your fork into roast goose when you're annoyed." Tilda paused. "That's disturbingly specific." Madeline hummed. "Lord Evan is very quiet. But I always thought he had gentle eyes. Like a deer. A tall, armored deer." Tilda threw a cushion at her. The next morning, Tilda found a falcon on her windowsill. It had a note tied to its leg. "My Lady Tilda, I am sorry if I startled you with yesterday's request. I only meant to be honest. I will not trouble you at Harrowdale again unless welcomed. However, I shall write. 4 words are safer than swords. Yours in admiration, Evan of Lysmere. P.S. The bird is called rutabaga. Please feed him meat. Tilda stared at the note for a long time. Then she looked at the bird. It blinked at her, unimpressed. I hope you're not as sentimental as your master, she muttered, tearing off a strip of bacon and tossing it onto the sill. 3 days later, a parcel arrived. A pressed mountain flower and a crude but well-written treatise on border defense strategies in muddy terrain, annotated with wry humor. The next week a second letter came. Then another. Each one earnest, awkward, and alarmingly sincere. Tilda kept them all. In a drawer. Under her gloves. For archival purposes only, of course. By the second week, the garden maids began whispering when Lord Evan was spotted near the west orchard, walking a goat and asking if Tilda liked cheese. By the third week, Lady Agatha declared him refreshingly old-fashioned, and the sort of man who blushes when you compliment his boots. And by the fourth, Madeline caught Tilda smiling, actually smiling, while reading a letter that compared her eyes to stormlight in a polished helm. Still, when the next formal invitation came, a request for a walk by the riverside, Tilda responded by sending back a single line. Try again when you've learned to stop apologizing for being sincere. A week later she found a note pinned to the garden gate with a dagger. I'm not sorry this time. I want to know you properly. Just to stand beside you. E. Tilda stood in the rose-scented breeze, heart stubbornly thudding in her chest. She didn't know what unsettled her more, the fact that he kept trying, or the fact that she wasn't sure she wanted him to stop. Chapter 2. Courting a Cynic. Spring deepened, and with it, Lord Evan's determination blossomed like the cherry trees lining Harrowdale's eastern path, awkwardly and slightly out of season. Tilda Harrowdale found herself increasingly cornered by an invisible suitor. Not in person, thankfully, he was back at the border where he belonged, but in the form of a growing mountain of letters, parcels, and unsolicited but impressively accurate maps of local terrain. On the 4th Tuesday since the proposal incident, a delivery boy arrived with a package wrapped in oilskin and tied with a ribbon. Inside lay a neat bundle of pressed leaves and a note. These herbs are for clarity of thought and calmness of spirit. You mentioned once that migraines follow your social gatherings. I hope these help. If not, throw them at someone deserving. E. Tilda didn't smile. She merely curled her lips slightly in what one might mistake for amusement, if one were very foolish. Clarity of thought? Madeline sang as she swanned into Tilda's room. I should say he's smitten. Does he write you every day? Only every other day, Tilda replied, hiding the latest letter beneath her embroidery frame. I think he's rotating the falcons. Madeline giggled. You're keeping them. I'm documenting them. You're alphabetizing them. For archival reasons. And you pressed that wildflower from last week between pages of Machiavelli's The Prince. Tilda gave her sister a long, withering stare. It was a botanical experiment. Of course it was, Madeline chirped. So when are you letting him court you properly? Never, Tilda said flatly. This is not a courtship. This is a misfired affection from a man who thinks persistence is charming. But it is charming. Tilda scowled. So is a puppy chewing your slippers. It doesn't mean you let it marry you. That evening, during a particularly dull supper with Lord Remy from somewhere and his endless talk of tax reform, a servant interrupted with a sealed scroll. Tilda unfurled it beneath the table. Dear Lady Tilda, I will be present for the next week at Castleberry, just 15 miles west. If you would like to see what I do at the border, I can arrange a quiet visit. There's no obligation. I simply thought it might be better than letters. E. Tilda looked up, catching Madeline's eyes across the table. Madeline mouthed, Go. Tilda frowned. Then slowly she nodded. 2 days later. The sky was overcast as Tilda rode out toward Castleberry, accompanied by 2 guards and enough skepticism to flatten a battalion. She wore a travel gown of stormy gray, with her hair twisted in a coronet that signaled very clearly, I am not here to be flirted with. The castle itself was modest, perched along the borderlands, half fortress and half barracks. Banners of Lysmere snapped lazily in the wind. Soldiers moved like ants, orderly and mud-streaked, pausing only to bow when Lady Harrowdale passed. Lord Evan met her at the gate in full training gear, chestplate, sword, and an expression that hovered between joy and abject terror. "My lady," he said, voice steadier than expected. "Lord Evan," she returned, dismounting with more grace than she felt. "I hope you don't expect a picnic." He blinked. "No, I don't. I arranged a demonstration of tactical drills. And tea. Tea. In the armory. It's clean. Mostly." She studied him. "Very well. Impress me." The drills were, well, impressive. Tilda observed from a raised platform, arms folded, while Evan moved among soldiers with sharp, confident commands. He wasn't just competent, he was commanding, respected, even a little intimidating. He shouted instructions with clarity and corrected stances without apology. At one point, a sparring match erupted into a mock skirmish. Evan blocked a strike with the flat of his blade and swept his opponent off his feet in one clean motion. Tilda's eyebrows rose. The clumsy letter writer from the garden now looked every inch the soldier. He noticed her gaze and grinned sheepishly. The moment shattered. Later, in the armory, Tilda sat on a barrel of arrows while Evan poured tea from a dented kettle. His hair was damp from exertion, cheeks flushed and armor streaked with grass. "I know this isn't exactly Harrowdale hospitality," he said, offering her a mismatched cup. Tilda took it delicately. "Well, at least it's not poisoned." "Probably." He looked horrified. She smirked. "That was a joke, Evan." "Oh. Right. Ha." A silence fell as they sipped. Tilda glanced at the wall where someone had hung a portrait of a goat. "Is that?" "Border mascot," Evan said quickly. "His name's Gregory." "Of course it is." When the tea ran out, Evan grew visibly nervous. I brought something," he said, reaching into a satchel and producing a fistful of slightly crushed dandelions. Tilda stared. "They were growing by the training field," he explained. "I thought, well, no, I didn't think exactly. I just picked them." Tilda looked at the flowers, yellow and cheerful and entirely unsuited to courtship. Then she looked at Evan, his ears red, fingers stained green, his heart practically pinned to his tunic. She sighed and took the dandelions. "Thank you," she said very softly. His smile could have lit the entire border. On their ride back toward Harrowdale, the caravan was ambushed. Well, ambushed by bandits, which sounded romantic until one realized they were mostly underfed boys with rusty knives. Tilda ducked instinctively, but before she could draw her dagger, Evan threw himself in front of her, sword raised. "Get behind me," he barked, no longer shy but full of fire. The guards engaged. Evan took a blow to the shoulder but didn't falter. Tilda, refusing to cower, threw a rock at a bandit's head. It worked surprisingly well. In 5 minutes the scuffle ended. 2 bandits fled. The rest were detained. Evan was bleeding. "You idiot," Tilda snapped, pressing a handkerchief to his arm. "You didn't even flinch. You could have been hurt." "I am hurt. In the sense that I now have blood on my favorite riding gloves." He winced. "Sorry." "Stop apologizing." "Right." That night, after returning safely to Harrowdale, Tilda stood at her window holding a slightly bent dandelion. Her sister entered quietly. "Well?" Madeline asked. Tilda didn't answer right away. She was staring into the dusk, her jaw set in thought. Finally she said, "He's still clumsy. But he's braver than he lets on." Madeline sat beside her. And I don't think he's joking." They sat in silence for a moment longer. Then Tilda added with no small amount of dread, "I may be in trouble." Chapter 3. The Scandalous Garden Incident. By mid-April, Harrowdale was a buzzing nest of whispers. Lady Tilda Harrowdale, the famously impervious, sharp-tongued spinster of 3 seasons and 2 rejected marquises, was officially being wooed. Not courted in the usual fashion, no. There were no orchestra-led serenades or elaborate floral arrangements delivered daily. Instead there were crushed dandelions, goats named Gregory, tea in armories and blood-stained handkerchiefs. And everyone at Harrowdale was utterly obsessed. Tilda, for her part, was doing her best to ignore the growing speculation. She remained brisk in the mornings, sharp in conversation, and ruthlessly dismissive of any comment involving the word Lord Evan. "Why do they care?" she snapped one afternoon, slamming shut a book on siege warfare. "Because," said Aunt Agatha, daintily selecting a biscuit, "you are 25 and terrifying. The idea that someone not only likes you but actively wishes to marry you has shattered several people's understanding of the world." Tilda glared. "I am not terrifying. You once told a viscount that his mustache looked like a drowned caterpillar. He asked if I did needlepoint. I don't do needlepoint." "I know, dear. That's why your embroidery is framed under Abstract Modern in the gallery." The real scandal began on a mild Thursday afternoon in the gardens. Lord Evan, freshly returned from Castleberry for a short leave, had requested a walk. It wasn't the walk that caused the scandal. It was what happened during it. Tilda wore a practical lilac day dress with deep pockets, which she filled with a folded map, 3 peppermints and a small dagger, because one never knew. She met Lord Evan near the West Hedge maze, where he stood fiddling nervously with a satchel. "You're early," she said. He smiled. "I didn't want to risk missing you." "That's surprisingly clever of you." He flushed. They walked together along the gravel path, conversations skipping between books, border patrols, and what flowers rabbits hated most. Evan, still slightly bashful, recounted a failed attempt to fix a bridge near the southern marsh. "I thought I could reinforce it myself with rope and optimism," he said. "Turns out I am not an engineer." "You fell in." "Twice." Tilda laughed, actually laughed, and he looked momentarily stunned, as if her smile were more dangerous than any bandit. It was during this pleasant interlude, as they passed under a willow near the reflecting pond, that Lord Evan tripped. On nothing. One moment he was upright. The next he flailed forward, arms outstretched, wild-eyed, and crashed straight into Tilda. They fell together. Into the pond. The splash was monumental. The silence afterward was even worse. Tilda surfaced first, hair soaked, skirts heavy, dignity drowned. Evan emerged a moment later, sputtering and utterly mortified. I'm so sorry, I didn't see the route." "Was there a route?" "There had to be a route." Tilda raised a hand. He froze. Then slowly she reached up, and flicked a lily pad off his head. "Well," she said, lips twitching, "this is certainly not how most courtships go." He looked like he might cry. Or faint. Or apologize himself into another dimension. But before he could do any of those things, Tilda stood, squelched, and offered him her hand. He took it. They stood there, dripping, bedraggled, and somehow, absurdly, laughing. Until Lady Rosamond Harbury rounded the hedge. She stopped, gasped, and shrieked, "You've compromised her." Within 2 hours the story had reached every noble within a 30-mile radius. According to wildly inconsistent retellings, Tilda had been thrown into the pond during a heated kiss. Lord Evan had rescued her from drowning by tearing off his shirt. They were engaged. They were eloping. They were already married and expecting twins. Aunt Agatha found Tilda drying by the fireplace in a borrowed robe, hair wrapped in a towel, sipping brandy with murderous focus. "Well," the old lady said cheerfully, "it could have been worse. You could have landed in the manure trough." Tilda glared. "If anyone suggests he compromised me again, I will personally compromise their face with my boot." "Language, dear." Madeline peered in wide-eyed. "Are you going to marry him now?" "No," Tilda snapped. "But you like him." "I tolerate him." "You keep his letters under your pillow." "I do not." Madeline smirked. "That's where you keep the dagger." "Which is resting on top of the letters." Tilda said nothing. She just took a long drink and stared into the fire. Later that evening a note arrived. "Dear Lady Tilda, I swear on every goat at Castleberry that I did not intend to drown you. I will make amends in any way you see fit. Unless that involves public speaking. Then I may faint. P.S. I will understand if you no longer wish to be seen with me. I will retire from your courtship efforts with honor if you request it. Tilda stared at the letter. She didn't respond that night. But she didn't throw it in the fire either. She slid it under the dagger on her nightstand, right on top of the others. The next morning she woke up to find Rutabaga the falcon scratching at her window again. This time instead of a note the bird carried a small pouch. Inside was a simple silver pin in the shape of a sword crossed with a quill. There was no message. Just that tiny gesture. Tilda sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, turning the pin over in her fingers. Then she smiled. A real one. Chapter 4. A lesson in etiquette and swordplay. Lady Tilda Harrowdale was many things. Astute, unsentimental, and deeply unimpressed by dramatic gestures. But what she had never been until recently was the subject of persistent gentle affection. Lord Evan of Lysmere, third son and certified hazard around pawns, had made her laugh. Twice. She hadn't laughed like that in years. Which was why, on a breezy afternoon 1 week after the garden incident, Tilda found herself walking into the Harrowdale courtyard in fencing gear. "You're going to fence with him?" Madeline asked, her tone hovering between disbelief and glee. "No," Tilda said. "I'm going to teach him. He needs it. And the swordplay is symbolic of me sticking something sharp into someone who deserves it. The symbolism is entirely practical." Of course. Lord Evan arrived exactly on time, wearing the ill-fitting fencing uniform of a man more used to real battle than sport. He looked both thrilled and mildly terrified. "You actually want to spar with me?" he asked, tightening his gloves. "I want to see if you flail as much with a blade as you do with romantic intent," Tilda replied crisply. "And I need a warm-up." Evan grinned. "You're going to destroy me, aren't you?" "Almost certainly." Round 1. Tilda landed a clean touch in 3 seconds. Evan blinked. "Is that legal?" "No," she said, "but it was satisfying." Round 2. He tried to parry. His blade slipped. He nearly disarmed himself. She stepped back, mildly impressed. Round 3. He finally held his ground and grinned when she complimented his stance. "You're not entirely hopeless," she said. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. I'm sure I've said worse." "I'll take it." They broke for lemonade under the rose-covered trellis. Evan had sweat through his shirt. Tilda had barely flushed. "You're not like the other ladies," he said after a moment. "Good," Tilda replied. "I never wanted to be. And I assume you're not like the other lords. Or at least I hope not." He hesitated. "Most people think I'm dull." "You're not dull. You're earnest. And a bit of a disaster." He smiled sheepishly. "I like disasters," she added before she could stop herself. "The honest kind at least." He looked at her then, truly looked. No bashfulness, no fear, just a kind of quiet wonder. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." Later that week an invitation arrived. A spring masquerade at Castle Darringford. Nobility from half the county would attend. There would be dancing, music, possibly scandal. And no shortage of watchful eyes waiting to see if Lady Tilda Harrowdale would at last arrive with a partner. Tilda stared at the gilded envelope. "Don't," she warned her sister, who hadn't said a word. "I said nothing," Madeline replied, already smiling. "I'm going for the wine and the opportunity to embarrass Lord Carsham if he tries to talk politics. And if a certain third son of a duke happens to be there, he'll probably step on someone's hem and fall face first into the punch bowl. So you're picking your gown?" "I'm considering my armor." When the night of the masquerade arrived, Tilda chose deep sapphire silk and a silver half-mask. Her hair was pinned up with sharp combs that doubled as defense weapons, just in case. Her demeanor said untouchable. Her heart, however, was less cooperative, especially when she saw Lord Evan. He wore navy and gold, his blonde hair neatly swept, and a mask that barely concealed his familiar awkwardness. He spotted her across the ballroom, then walked into a waiter. Tilda smiled behind her fan, then made her way toward him. They met near the edge of the ballroom. "You clean up," she said, alarmingly well. He bowed. "I try. I also memorized 4 dances and practiced not stepping on toes." "Your own or others?" Both. She offered him her hand. Let's test your studies then. They danced. And, miracle of miracles, he didn't trip. In fact, Evan danced with a steady confidence that surprised her. He wasn't a natural, but he had learned. For her. Halfway through a spin he whispered, "Is this part of my training too?" "Yes," she murmured, "and you're doing alarmingly well." The music swelled. At the end of the second dance Tilda began to withdraw, only for Evan to gently catch her hand. "Stay," he said. "Tired already?" "No. But I'm not sure how long I'll have you like this. With me. Not running." She didn't answer right away. Instead she looked around. At the gossiping ladies, the watching eyes, the whispers. Then she looked back at Evan. "Let them talk," she said simply. He looked stunned. But he smiled. Later, after the dancing, they stood on a balcony overlooking the garden. Tilda leaned on the stone railing. Evan stood beside her, a respectable distance away. Until she reached for his hand. His breath caught. "I still don't want to marry," she said quietly. "Not yet. I'm not asking again. Not unless you want me to." She turned to face him. "I like that you're not afraid of me. I like that you fall into ponds and still manage to hold your sword steady. I like you." He looked at her like she'd hung the moon. "I'll wait," he said. "However long it takes." She smiled. "You won't have to wait forever." Then boldly she leaned up and kissed him. It was brief. It was clumsy. It was perfect. Chapter 5. A Gentleman's Duel and a Lady's Retort. By the following week, society had reached a collective conclusion. Lady Tilda Harrowdale was absolutely without question being courted. Naturally, this was unacceptable. Not to Tilda, of course. She had already decided she rather liked Evan's attention, and the way his letters always ended with some horribly sweet line that she reread 3 times before scowling. But it was unacceptable to society. Because Lady Harrowdale, as everyone knew, was too opinionated, too old, and far too prone to sarcasm to be anyone's blushing bride. "Perhaps he's under a spell," someone whispered at Lady Beechworth's brunch. "Or being blackmailed," suggested another. "Or it's a bet." That last one came from Lord Cedric Pembroke, the same man who had once tried to woo Tilda with 3 bouquets of poisonous lilies and a poem that rhymed Harrowdale with marital jail. And when he declared publicly that no man in his right mind would pursue Lady Tilda unless tricked, it was only a matter of time before someone told Evan. He didn't even hesitate. He challenged Lord Cedric to a duel. When Tilda heard, she dropped her teacup. "He what?" Aunt Agatha calmly spooned honey into her tea. "Oh yes. Very gallant. Stupid, of course. But gallant. He can't duel over me. I'm not some fragile daisy in need of defending. I can crush Cedric with 3 sentences and an arched brow." "Yes," said Madeline cheerfully, "but Evan has honor. Also, Cedric implied he was courting you as part of a wager. That's enough to provoke any romantic idiot." "He's going to get skewered," Tilda muttered. "I swear if Cedric so much as nicks him, I'll duel both of them myself." The duel was to take place the next morning at dawn. Tilda, of course, arrived early. She wore no bonnet, no veil, just her practical gray riding coat and an expression that promised consequences. When Evan arrived, flanked by his brother, the rather dignified heir to Lysmere, she nearly grabbed him by the collar and marched him back to the carriage. Instead, she crossed her arms. "I didn't ask you to do this." "I know," he said, voice soft. "But I wanted to." "He insulted you." "I've been insulted before." "Yes. But never while I was in love with you." Tilda blinked. And for the first time in years her mouth forgot how to form a reply. The duel was, in short, a farce. Cedric, who had likely never held a real blade in his life, tripped over his own bootlaces within seconds and narrowly avoided stabbing himself in the shin. Evan, ever polite, offered to help him up. Cedric responded by swinging wildly and accidentally cutting Evan's coat. Tilda's eyes narrowed. She began walking toward them. "Should I stop her?" the Duke's heir asked his younger brother. "No," Evan said, watching her with a smile. "This'll be better than the duel." Tilda reached Cedric just as he was puffing himself up. "I do hope," she said in an eerily calm tone, that wasn't meant as a death blow. Cedric turned. Ah, Lady Tilda, do be quiet. You've embarrassed yourself enough. He blinked. Tilda took the sword from Evan's hand, then turned and flicked Cedric's blade from his grip in one elegant motion. The metal clattered to the ground. She stepped forward. Next time you want to insult a woman in public, do remember, some of us are armed. Then she turned to Evan. Are you bleeding? Only my pride. You'll survive. I'm used to it. I court you, remember? She rolled her eyes. Idiot. He grinned. Yours. She paused, then gave a small genuine nod. Yes. Mine. By noon all of Harrowdale and most of Lysmere knew about the duel. They also knew about Lady Tilda's sword work, Evan's hopeless devotion, and how the two of them had ridden off together afterward like a slightly soggy, highly sarcastic fairy tale. Tilda spent the afternoon in the Harrowdale library pretending not to be flustered. Aunt Agatha eventually peeked in. Cedric's fled to the coast. Good. Evan sent another letter. Tilda looked up. It says he's sorry for worrying you, he's not concussed, and would you still consider stabbing people with him in a more permanent capacity? Tilda closed her eyes. And it includes, Agatha added delicately, a list of reasons why he thinks you're marvelous. 4 pages long. Tilda opened her eyes again. Did he spell everything correctly this time? Almost. That evening she penned her reply. Dear Evan, your dueling form is passable. Your aim is adequate. Your choice of romantic target is questionable at best. And yet, somehow I find myself increasingly fond of you. You may continue to court me. But if you ever do something so stupidly reckless again, I will throw you into the pond on purpose this time. Yours possibly. P.S. You are not dull. You are not a disaster. You are mine. Try not to ruin it. Chapter 6. A Proposal and a Goose Chase. Spring was in full bloom across Harrowdale, with birds singing, roses unfurling, and rumors. Oh, the rumors, flying faster than the morning falcon. Lady Tilda Harrowdale, once a notorious cynic and self-declared spinster, was now officially the subject of one of the most persistent courtships in the county. The object of this campaign was none other than Lord Evan Lysmere, third son of the Duke, awkward, earnest, and apparently incapable of doing anything without tripping over something first. The day began with an urgent message tied to Rutabaga's leg. Meet me by the old mill at noon. I have something important to say. Evan. Tilda suspected it was either a proposal or a plan to retrieve his lost sword from the pond. Either way, she intended to arrive prepared. At noon, the sun bright and warm, she found Evan pacing beside the mill, looking unusually serious. He saw her and smiled, but his hand trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket. I wasn't sure if you'd come, he said. I'm not about to let you embarrass yourself without an audience. He laughed, then reached into his pocket and produced a small, slightly crooked silver ring. I've been thinking, he began, about what you said. About not wanting to marry yet. Tilda arched an eyebrow. Well, I still don't want to rush. Good. But I do want to ask if you'll consider being my partner. Tilda blinked. Not just in duels or dances. In everything. In laughter and frustration. In muddy boots and quiet mornings. He knelt, slightly awkward but utterly sincere, and held out the ring. Will you be my partner, Lady Tilda? Tilda's heart fluttered. It was ridiculous how much she wanted to say yes. Before she could answer, a loud honking interrupted them. A flock of geese came waddling toward the mill, led by Gregory, the infamous goat. They scattered the geese with much flapping and honking chaos. Evan laughed. I think Gregory disapproves. Tilda laughed too, taking his hand. Yes, she said. I will. That evening, under the stars and the warm glow of lanterns, the Harrowdale estate celebrated what everyone agreed was the most charming engagement in recent history. Madeline whispered to Aunt Agatha, I always knew my sister would find someone who could match her wit. Aunt Agatha smiled. She found someone who didn't run from her sharp edges. That's love. Tilda and Evan stood side by side, hands entwined, ready to face whatever came next. But sometimes, the best romances are the ones that start with a splash and a slightly soggy kiss. Chapter 7. Quiet Moments and Soft Confessions. The days after the engagement announcement felt like a dream stitched together with gentle smiles and quiet glances. Lady Tilda Harrowdale found herself walking in the garden more often, sometimes alone, sometimes with Evan at her side. The sharp edges she carried so proudly were softened, not dulled, just softened by his easy presence. One afternoon, Evan caught her tending the roses near the old fountain. "Do you think the roses will forgive me for all the noise I've made lately?" he asked, voice low. Tilda glanced up, surprised by how easily the corners of her mouth lifted. "They're resilient," she said, "but I think they're waiting for you to stop chasing geese in the garden." He chuckled. "I suppose that's a fair request." She wiped her hands on her skirt and took a step closer. "You're better at fencing than chasing geese, though. I've seen it." His eyes brightened. "You mean I'm not hopeless?" "Hardly. You're charmingly clumsy." He grinned, then hesitated. "Do you ever worry?" he asked. "About what?" "About us. About the future." Tilda considered the question. She'd spent years guarding herself against disappointment, against foolish hopes. "I suppose I do," she admitted quietly. "But I also think that with the right partner even the unknown becomes bearable." Evan reached for her hand, his fingers warm and steady. "Then let's be bearable together." She squeezed his hand, her usual sharpness softened by something new. "Together," she agreed. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in soft pinks and purples, they shared a simple supper in the garden. No masks, no formalities. Just two people. Imperfect, earnest, and unexpectedly in love. Tilda caught Evan watching her, a smile tugging at his lips. "What?" she asked, amused. "Just thinking how lucky I am," he said softly. Tilda's heart fluttered. "Well," she said with a playful smirk, "don't get too used to it. I'm still the seasoned cynic." Evan laughed. "And I'm still the hopeless disaster who's fallen completely and irrevocably for her." They leaned into each other, the world quiet around them. For the first time in a long time, Tilda didn't need to be sharp. He just needed to be.